They say maps are a promise that the world is laid bare, that every road, every mountain, every city has been measured, named, and marked. But what if I told you that's a lie? That between the neatly printed borders and carefully drawn coastlines, there are blank spaces, not by accident, but by design. For centuries, cartographers have done more than record, they've concealed. Certain places were never meant for the public to find. Sometimes because they held military secrets, sometimes because they sheltered wealth and power, and sometimes because something darker lived there. These aren't the hidden villages you might find buried in folklore. These are real cities, thriving, pulsing with life, yet deliberately erased from every official map. No coordinates, no public records. Even satellite images blur them into clouds or forests. They exist only in whispers, in old travelers' journals smuggled out under torchlight, in fragments of testimony from people who swear they've been there, and barely made it back. And if you've never heard of them before, that's exactly the point. Some were the work of governments who needed entire cities for testing weapons or housing the world's most dangerous minds. Others were the last safe havens for cultures that would rather vanish from history than surrender to conquerors. And some, if you believe the accounts, were erased not to protect us from them but to protect them from us. But the strangest thing? These secret cities don't just disappear physically. It's as if they erased themselves from memory. Researchers who set out to find them come home with only fragments of what they saw, like someone has stolen pieces of their mind. Maps they carried into the expedition come back warped. Streets that loop into themselves, rivers that change course overnight, landmarks that appear in one moment and vanish the next. One 19th century explorer wrote of a city, built from stone that glowed as if lit from within, where the air was so thick with quiet it hurt to breathe. His journal was found decades later, but the location he described doesn't exist on any chart, ancient or modern. Another account from the Cold War tells of a mining settlement so large it could rival a capital city, yet if you search for it now, the region is nothing but tundra. The name of the place has been scrubbed from every official record as if it never existed. And here's where the unease begins to creep in. Removing a city from a map is easy, ink fades, records burn. But removing it from every eye in the sky, from every GPS, from every satellite photo, even in an age of constant surveillance? That's not just secrecy. That's control. Tonight we'll travel into the territories the world denies. Places your government doesn't want you to know exist. From desert metropolises sealed off with electric fences to mountain strongholds where the air is said to hum, these are the 6 secret cities that never appear on any map. And once you know their names, you might understand why. But remember, every legend starts with a whisper, and every whisper comes from someone who ignored the warnings. So if you hear a story about a place that isn't there, you'd better ask yourself one thing before going further. What if the reason it's hidden is because you're not meant to come back? In the frozen reaches of Siberia, where the air cuts like glass and the sky seems to weigh heavy with secrets, there is a place the Soviet Union swore never existed. Norilsk itself is notorious enough. One of the most isolated industrial cities on Earth, locked behind government permissions and surrounded by endless tundra. But a few kilometers beyond its steel-gray skyline, buried beneath snow and silence, there once stood something stranger. Norilsk 7. Officially, it was nothing more than an auxiliary outpost, a logistical waypoint to support Arctic exploration. Unofficially, it was a self-contained port city, complete with docks, rail lines, barracks, and underground facilities, designed to house thousands of workers and scientists. But the work they were doing there was never meant to see daylight. Most records suggest Norilsk 7 was tied to a Soviet-era mining and metallurgy project involving rare minerals critical for nuclear weapon production. Yet scattered eyewitness accounts hint at something far more unsettling. Former residents, now old and hesitant to speak, tell of trains that arrived at midnight carrying unmarked crates sealed in lead. Of research labs that ran day and night under glaring floodlights, and of a second harbor deep beneath the ice, accessible only through a tunnel guarded by armed patrols. The strangest detail comes from a fisherman named Arkady, who claims he worked near the coastline in the late 1970s. One night, he followed a stretch of icy shoreline that locals whispered was off-limits. In the distance, he saw enormous ships docked at a pier glowing with pale blue light. When he tried to approach, he said the air hummed, so violently his teeth hurt, and within moments, armed soldiers appeared from nowhere. He was escorted away, questioned for hours, and warned that if he ever returned, his family would disappear into the snow. Arkady never went back, but he never forgot the humming duppy. By the early 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Norilsk 7 was reportedly abandoned. Satellite images show nothing but ice and barren land where the city should have been. Yet here's the problem. Those who claim to have lived or worked there insist the structures were too massive to simply vanish. Buildings like that don't melt, one former engineer said. They were taken away or buried. Modern explorers who attempt to locate the site find their GPS devices glitching or shutting down entirely within a certain radius. Compass needles spin. Camera batteries drain in minutes. It's as if the landscape itself rejects recording. The few photos that make it out are grainy and warped, with strange flares of light distorting the horizon. The Russian government refuses to acknowledge Norilsk 7 ever existed. When asked, officials shrug and say, "You mean Norilsk?" As though the -7 was nothing but a misunderstanding. But deep in certain archives, maps from the 1960s show a curious blacked-out rectangle near the Kara Sea coast, labeled only with a series of numbers that correspond to no known settlement. The mark vanishes from all maps printed after 1972. Why erase an entire port city from history? The simplest theory is military secrecy, nuclear research, weapons testing, or strategic shipping routes hidden from Western eyes. But some believe the true reason was older, stranger. Norilsk lies atop vast mineral deposits, yes, but also over ancient geological formations riddled with massive, unexplored caverns. The idea that something could have been found beneath Norilsk 7, something too valuable or too dangerous to share, has become the quiet obsession of certain fringe historians. And perhaps the most chilling clue comes from a recently uncovered Soviet memo marked Soversheno Sekretno, top secret. Dated 1969, it warns of anomalous emissions detected in the port's underground sector and instructs that contact beyond Phase 2 is prohibited without authorization from the Central Committee. No one knows what Phase 2 referred to. Today, the site is marked by nothing more than windswept ice. The pier Arkady described is gone, or invisible. But if you stand at the right spot, some say you can still hear it, that low mechanical hum rising and falling beneath the sound of the Arctic wind. And those who hear it? They turn back quickly, afraid of finding out what still sleeps beneath the snow. The Kunlun Mountains in western China are a place of almost mythical hostility, razor-edged peaks, valleys swallowed by clouds, and winds so fierce they can strip the skin from bone. Ancient Chinese texts called this range the spine of the earth, a phrase that sounds poetic until you realize they meant it literally. This was the backbone of the world, the place where realms above and below connected. It's here, in the shadow of those mountains, that whispers tell of a city that has never appeared on a map. A settlement hidden not on the surface but inside the earth. Locals call it Shenlu, the Tower of the Gods, though no towers rise above the snow. If you ask too many questions, you'll hear the same reply in a tone that mixes fear and impatience. It's not for outsiders. The earliest mention of Shenlu comes from a 7th century Buddhist monk named Su Xian, whose travel diary, preserved in a monastery for over 1,000 years, contains a strange passage. Beyond the ice river, there is a gate cut into the mountain, guarded by 2 figures who do not breathe. They speak no tongue known to man, yet their meaning is clear. I was shown the path inward, but only for a day, and the sun did not follow me there. What follows is a description of vast corridors carved into greenish stone, illuminated by orbs that floated without flame. Su Xian wrote of meeting people with eyes like polished obsidian, who offered him food he could not identify, food that filled him for 3 days. When he left, the entrance sealed behind him, and he was told it would not open again in his lifetime. Modern scholars dismiss this as allegory. But things get stranger in the 20th century. In 1932, a joint Sino-German expedition vanished in the Kunlun Range while searching for uranium deposits. Weeks later, one surviving member stumbled into a village hundreds of kilometers away. He spoke of finding a city beneath the mountain, and claimed the people there knew his name before he spoke it. His account was quickly silenced. Official reports state the man suffered from altitude-induced hallucinations, and was committed to a psychiatric facility. Satellite imagery of the Kunlun region shows nothing unusual, except for one stretch of mountain where the snow melt forms a perfect oval year after year, even in the harshest winters. Geologists have no explanation for the phenomenon, but explorers who've tried to reach it rarely return. Those who do speak of sudden wideouts, disorienting echoes, and the unsettling sensation of being watched by something just out of sight. The legend links Shenlu to Agartha, the mythical underground kingdom said to exist in tunnels deep within the Earth's crust. Esoteric writings from the early 1900s suggest Shenlu was not just an isolated city, but an outpost, a northern gateway to an even larger subterranean network. If true, that would explain the precision with which it has been kept off maps. It isn't just a secret city, it's a doorway. In 2009, a Chinese climber named Li Wen posted a series of grainy photographs online showing what he claimed was the Kunlun Gate. The images depict a perfectly smooth archway set into the rock, about 10 meters tall, with intricate geometric patterns glowing faintly along its surface. Within hours, the photos were deleted and Li Wen's account vanished. When journalists tried to contact him, they were told he had moved overseas. No one has heard from him since. Could Shenlu still be active? So who, or what, lives there now? And perhaps more disturbing, why would they need to hide from the world above? The answer may lie in the fragment of an inscription recorded by Su Xian over a millennium ago. He claimed it was carved in both human script and an unknown language. When the stars move from their path and the earth grows thin, we will close the door and wait. A warning? A prophecy? Or just a relic of an ancient belief system long forgotten? Whatever Shenlu is, it remains absent from every official chart. And in the Kunlun shadows, where the air thins and the peaks scrape the heavens, there are those who still swear they've seen the gate, before it dissolved into the mountain like mist. The Nevada desert is a strange kind of empty, an emptiness that feels planned. Long highways cut through endless flats of cracked earth, and here and there, you'll find fences with no buildings, cameras pointing at nothing, and signs warning you not to cross an invisible line. It's a landscape famous for secrets, Area 51, classified test ranges, Cold War bunkers. But somewhere between the city of Ely and the Utah border lies a place so quiet that even most conspiracy theorists don't know its name: Palmyra Deep. Officially, there's nothing there. Pull up the area on Google Maps and you'll see nothing but sand, shrubs, and ridges. But if you zoom in far enough, something strange happens. The image resolution drops, just for a single square of land. Not pixelation from old images, not a cloud cover, just a deliberate blur. Pilots in the area call it the Black Grid. Stories of Palmyra Deep first surfaced in the early 1980s, when truckers driving the isolated State Route 893 claimed they saw huge convoys of military vehicles heading off-road toward the grid location. Oddly, they weren't marked with Air Force insignia or any standard U.S. military logos, just a black diamond symbol, sometimes spray-painted onto the trucks. What's rumored to be under that desert is no ordinary base. Several whistleblowers, men and women who once worked for civilian construction firms contracted by private defense companies, describe being flown in blindfolded, taken underground via massive freight elevators, and working in chambers so deep they couldn't feel the desert heat above. They called it the grid below. One former engineer claims the site's purpose wasn't weapons research, but containment. Containment of what, he wouldn't say, only that the deeper levels were sealed by blast doors several meters thick, guarded by personnel who refused to speak even to each other. The atmosphere inside, he recalled, was different, like the air itself was heavier. Things took a darker turn in 2007, when a small team of amateur explorers set out to find the Black Grid on foot. They carried GPS units, cameras, and weeks' worth of supplies. After 3 days, their last satellite phone call reported they had found a strange shimmering on the horizon. Then the line went dead. When search teams arrived, they found the group's camp, gear still neatly arranged, but no sign of the explorers themselves. The GPS logs ended abruptly less than 2 miles from the blurred map. Square.in 2019, a leaked FAA flight restriction map confirmed an unmarked no-fly zone over the area, one that has existed since at least the early 1990s. No public reason was ever given. Strangely, commercial flights in the area sometimes report navigation interference, with instruments briefly showing their plane hundreds of miles off course before returning to normal. Some theorists believe Palmyra Deep is a fail-safe vault, a place where something discovered decades ago, possibly not of human origin, is kept sealed far beneath the earth. Others think it's a control hub for a classified satellite grid, one capable of manipulating communications, weather, or even seismic activity. But the most unsettling claims come from those who say they've been inside, people who insist there's a level far below the containment chambers, a level they call the downwell. There, according to them, the walls are lined with metal plates etched in symbols no one has been able to translate. The temperature drops to near freezing, even in the heart of the Nevada summer. And sometimes, when the generators go silent, you can hear knocking coming from the other side of the wall. No official document acknowledges Palmyra Deep exists. Yet the Black Grid remains, an empty square on the map that stays empty no matter how advanced our imaging becomes. Whether it hides technology, a threat, or something far stranger, only those behind the blast doors know the truth. And if history tells us anything, they have no intention of letting the rest of us find out. Beneath the restless waters of the Mediterranean, where the sea floor drops suddenly into darkness, there is said to be a city the world has spent 2,000 years trying to forget. Not Atlantis. This is older, smaller, and far more dangerous to history's official story. Its name survives only in fragments of Phoenician script. Kari-Somara, the place of the last light. According to maritime folklore, fishermen along the coast of modern-day Libya used to speak of a shadow that would pass beneath their boats when the sea was calm, long, symmetrical, and shaped like streets. When they dropped their nets too deep, they sometimes pulled up carved stones instead of fish. Most sold them quietly to traders, never questioning their origin. But a few kept the relics, and their descendants swear the stones bear inscriptions unlike any known ancient language. Kari-Somara's first written mention comes from a suppressed manuscript by a Greek chronicler named Demetrios of Chios, who sailed in the service of Rome during the 1st century BCE. His account, preserved only in fragments found in a monastery archive, tells of a storm driving his ship onto a reef of black marble far from any charted land. There, he claimed, stood half-submerged columns and a vast staircase descending into the sea. The locals who rescued him warned that the ruins belonged to a city, erased by the hands of men, not the hands of the gods. For centuries, the Catholic Church maintained a quiet but deliberate denial of the site's existence. Priests in coastal towns warned sailors that certain waters were unclean and forbidden. Later Islamic historians in the region mentioned a city of the sea destroyed by divine wrath, but added no details, except that its people had practiced rites that drew fire from the sky. Modern oceanographers have occasionally picked up sonar returns showing geometric patterns on the sea floor in the region where Carisel Mara is said to rest. In 1968, a joint Italian-Libyan survey recorded a grid of stone foundations nearly a kilometer long, aligned with surprising mathematical precision. Within days, the findings were classified under maritime security agreements, and the raw data vanished from public access. The team's lead diver later gave a single cryptic statement to a local newspaper: "We saw lights down there. Moving lights." The theory that most unsettles historians is that Carisel Mara was deliberately flooded, not by natural disaster but by human engineering. Ancient channels carved into nearby rock hint that water was diverted intentionally, drowning the city in a matter of days. But why destroy an entire metropolis? One answer may lie in the doctrine of the last light, a heretical text banned by the early church. It speaks of a city whose priests kept the sun alive, using devices forged from meteoric metal, devices capable of creating unending fire. If such a technology existed, it would have been a direct challenge to both religious and imperial authority, enough reason to erase its existence entirely. Divers who've claimed to reach the ruins tell similar stories. Of streets intact beneath layers of coral, of statues whose eyes seem to follow them, of a central plaza where the stone is scorched black. The most consistent, and most chilling, detail is the sound. At a certain depth, they say, you can hear a low rhythmic thrum, as if something deep within the drowned city is still running. Officially, no map marks the location of Carisel Mara. The coordinates are passed only among a tight circle of treasure hunters and forbidden archaeologists, and even they admit the sea rarely allows them near. But every so often, when the Mediterranean is perfectly still and the light hits just right, fishermen swear they can see it, streets and walls glimmering beneath the surface, before the shadows swallow it again. Some believe it's a warning. Others think it's an invitation. And a few, those who've heard the thrum, say it's neither. It's simply the city waiting for the day the water recedes, and the last light burns again. The Amazon rainforest is vast enough to swallow entire nations. Its rivers twist like veins, its canopy blocks out the sun, and its storms roll in without warning, turning day to night in minutes. For centuries, it has hidden ruins, lost tribes, and creatures science refuses to confirm. But among its most carefully guarded secrets is said to be a living city, one that thrives without ever appearing on any map. The name comes from a whispered word used by the few outsiders who claim to have seen it: Anudakai, the city where the trees speak. It is said to stand in a valley so deep and isolated that the air inside remains misted year-round, fed by waterfalls taller than cathedrals. Its buildings, according to legend, are grown rather than built, hollowed trunks of ancient trees shaped into spiraling towers, bridges of living vines that stretch from one dwelling to another. The first modern mention of Anudakai comes from a 1924 journal entry by Brazilian explorer Elias Moreira. Tasked with mapping an uncharted tributary of the Rio Negro, Morera wrote of following a trail of bright feathers laid carefully along the forest floor. They led him to a clearing where the trees seemed too symmetrical to be natural. He claimed he saw figures watching him from the treeline, tall, robed in green, with masks shaped like bird skulls. When he stepped forward, the forest erupted with sound, drums, flutes, voices, and then, nothing. The clearing was empty. His maps from that journey were later confiscated by government officials under environmental protection laws. In the 1970s, rumors of Anudakai re-emerged when satellite images showed an impossible patch of bright green deep in the Amazon, a perfect circle untouched by logging or seasonal change. Botanists who reviewed the images noted plant species that did not match any recorded in the region. Weeks later, the images were replaced with generic forest photos. The anomaly has not reappeared since. Local tribes speak cautiously of Anudakai, suggesting it is not a single tribe but a council of many, formed centuries ago to protect something older than themselves. Stories tell of a sky jewel, a crystal that fell from above generations ago, bringing with it knowledge of medicine, architecture, and energy. The people of Anudakai, they say, keep it hidden at the heart of their city, and will never allow it to leave. Attempts to reach the supposed site almost always fail. Guides vanish mid-expedition, trails twist back on themselves, and compasses lose all sense of direction. Some explorers report hearing whispers in languages they do not understand carried on the wind. One survivor, a Peruvian botanist named Victor Salazar, claimed he reached the city in 1991. His description matched earlier accounts: tree-grown towers, vine bridges, streets paved with bioluminescent moss. But the detail that unsettled him most was the people's silence. They spoke without speaking, he wrote. Their eyes asked questions I could not answer. When Salazar returned to Lima, he refused to give coordinates. Within months, he left for the jungle again and never came back. Environmental activists argue that if Anudakai exists, its secrecy is essential to its survival. Governments and corporations, however, have reason to keep such a place hidden for entirely different motives, whether to exploit its resources or to suppress knowledge of technologies not accounted for in the modern world. That if you stand at certain points along the Rio Negro at dawn, locals say, you can see the tops of strange green towers glinting above the canopy for just a moment before the mist swallows them. Most dismiss it as a trick of the light. But those who've studied the sightings note they occur at the same time each year, when the river is at its highest and the sun rises at its shallowest angle. Whether Anudakai is a hidden refuge for an ancient alliance or something more extraordinary, one truth remains: it has stayed alive by staying invisible. And for those who live there, the outside world is not a mystery, it is a threat. Berlin is a city of scars. You can walk down its streets and see the history layered in stone. The ruins of bombed-out churches beside glass skyscrapers, Cold War watchtowers shadowing hip cafes. But beneath its bustling avenues and crowded train stations lies something the average Berliner will never see: a hidden city built not for comfort but for survival. Its official name does not exist. Among those who whisper about it, it's simply called Subterra. The story begins in the final years of World War II. As Allied bombers turned Berlin into rubble, Nazi engineers constructed an elaborate network of deep tunnels, bunkers, and storage halls. But when the war ended, not all of these structures were destroyed or abandoned. Some were sealed, their locations erased from post-war maps. What remained would later become the skeleton of something far stranger. In the early 1960s, with the Cold War in full swing, West German intelligence reportedly repurposed these forgotten chambers into a civilian continuity shelter. Official documents claimed it was meant to house essential personnel in the event of nuclear war. But survivors of the construction crews tell a different story. Subterra was designed for far more than a few government officials. It had capacity for thousands, housing blocks, food storage vaults, water recycling systems, even hydroponic farms. No one knows exactly when Subterra stopped being just an emergency plan and started becoming a functioning city. Some believe it never fully shut down. Whistleblowers have claimed that people live there permanently, descendants of those chosen for Operation Götterdämmerung, a Cold War relocation program that would have moved select families underground if nuclear war broke out. The war never came, but the families stayed. What they do down there remains a mystery. Maintenance crews for Berlin's subway system occasionally report hearing machinery in sealed-off tunnel sections. Machinery far larger than anything used for public transport. One worker described seeing lights flicker deep in a supposedly collapsed shaft. Another swore he heard distant voices speaking a dialect he didn't recognize, though the words had a distinctly German rhythm. In 2014, an urban explorer using ground-penetrating radar mapped a section of abandoned tunnel beneath Alexanderplatz. The scan revealed a massive chamber nearly 200 meters long, with what appeared to be multi-story structures inside. When he returned the next week, the tunnel entrance had been welded shut, and he was told by city officials that no such space exists. His data vanished in a break-in shortly afterward. Conspiracy theorists link Subterra to Berlin's uncanny resilience in crises. During blackouts, certain neighborhoods seem to recover power faster than the rest of the city. Emergency water pressure stays stable even when mains elsewhere drop. Some suspect that Subterra has its own independent infrastructure, capable of sustaining life indefinitely, and possibly monitoring the surface above. The most unsettling rumor, however, is that Subterra is not a Cold War relic at all, but an evolving experiment. That its population is carefully controlled. That children born down there never see the sky, raised instead under simulated daylight to keep their circadian rhythms intact. And that the city's leadership, whoever they are, has no intention of letting them leave. Officially, Berlin's government denies the existence of any such underground metropolis. But if you walk the streets late at night, you might notice the faint hum of air exchangers in places where no building should have them. And sometimes, just before dawn, vents in the oldest parts of the city release a sudden burst of warm air from below. Like a sleeping giant exhaling. If Subterra truly exists, it may be the most successful hidden city in human history. Not lost to disaster, not erased by the sea or the forest, but hidden right beneath our feet, watching and waiting. And if it was built to survive the end of the world, then perhaps the more important question isn't if it's real, but what exactly its people are waiting for. They say the map is not the territory. It's a phrase tossed around by philosophers, but when you've followed the trails we've just uncovered, it begins to sound less like wisdom and more like a warning that we've traced coordinates that don't exist, walked through gates that should have been sealed, and peered into cities that breathe without permission, thriving in silence, invisible to the world. But every discovery leads to a truth no cartographer will admit. Maps aren't made to show you everything. They're made to keep certain things hidden. Some secrets protect the innocent. Others protect power. And somewhere between those motives lies the delicate thread that's been spun for centuries, deciding what the rest of us are allowed to see. If these 6 places slipped past the eyes of history, how many more are still out there, waiting in the unmarked spaces, just beyond the reach of a curious finger tracing the paper? The map in your hands is lying to you. The question is, will you ever look at it the same way again?